Hey everyone, Nick Raboy here from Couchbase. We're going to be looking at how to deploy a PHP application as a Docker container, and it communicates with the Couchbase Server, so a NoSQL database. Before we get too invested in this, I want to tell you what this tutorial is not. This tutorial is not a way to deploy Couchbase Server as a Docker container. I have plenty of those uploaded to YouTube. I have some blog posts on the topic. There's plenty of information out there to deploy Couchbase Server itself as a container. This focus is actually on PHP. That said, I do have Couchbase Server running as a container already. So it's up on my screen. This is the Couchbase Server dashboard. What I've done is I've created one bucket called example. I've created a security rule. Basically, that's it. This is just all we need to get ourselves up and running with PHP, because the scope of this application, basically what we're going to do is we're going to insert data and we're going to read data. Very simple. We're not creating an API or anything. This is just a very simple application that's deployed with Docker. All right, with that said, what we want to do is we want to create a new project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my terminal here. This is all going to be terminal based as well as using a text editor. But what I'm going to do is I'm on my desktop. I'm going to create a new directory called PHP Docker, which is going to represent our project. And inside of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a few directories. So the first directory I'm going to create is going to be called, well, let me navigate into it. So PHP Docker, and I'm going to say make directory, and I'm going to say this is going to be application. I'm going to say make directory, and this is going to be configuration. And then finally, I'm going to say touch Docker file. So what that's going to do, and if you don't have these commands, it's fine. Make the mkdir will make a directory or a folder. You can do that manually. The touch command will create a file. Again, you can do that manually as well. This is just if you're on a Unix-based system and you want to use the terminal. So I've created those files. I'm also going to create a file within the application directory. This is actually going to be called index.php. And I'm going to say touch configuration. Actually, I'm not going to say touch configuration. We're going to save that for the next step. So what we have here is we have our PHP file. This is going to be accessible from, say, a web browser, or we can initialize it from as a PHP script. So I'm going to actually open this project in my text editor. So I just did Atom. Doesn't really matter what you use as far as the text editor goes, whatever you find preference in. But we're going to go ahead and open that index.php file. And we're going to actually build our PHP application, and then we're going to worry about containerizing it, so creating a Docker image that can be deployed. All right, so let's go ahead and start creating our PHP application. So I have my opening and closing tags to get us started here. What we're going to do is we're going to expect that this returns JSON as our response, so we're going to set the header information. So the header information, we're going to say content type. What we want to do is we want to say application/JSON. What we want to say is, well, we want to say maybe echo. We want to say starting the application. If we wanted to, actually, let's not do that. Let's leave that out. What we can do now is we can actually say, well, we want to connect to our Couchbase cluster. We want to open up a bucket and kind of get prepared to do what we want to do. So we're going to say cluster equals new Couchbase cluster. We're going to enter the URI here. Instead of hard coding this, we're actually going to be using environment variables. So remember, as our end result, and this is true for any application, not just for ones that are deployed with Docker, you don't want to hard code things in your PHP application. That's kind of a thing of the past. You want to use environment variables or some other configuration file, something that is kind of separated from your core application, and it makes it very easy to upgrade later on. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use environment variables. So we're going to say get env. This environment variable is going to be Couchbase host. We're going to have another line here where we got to create an authenticator. So after we specify the cluster, we want to authenticate to it. And remember, I created a username, and this user has access to a bucket that I had already created. This is preparation work that definitely do on your own. It's not difficult though. So what we're going to say is authenticator equals new Couchbase password authenticator. And as long as I spelled that right, we should be good to go. Now that we have an authenticator, we want to provide username and password information. So we're going to say authenticator, and we're going to say username, and the username is going to be getenv again, and this is going to be called Couchbase. We'll call this Couchbase RBAC, so a role-based access control, and we're going to call this username. And these terms for the environment variables, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you call them. I'm just going to call them something that I know personally what these mean. So role-based access control username, and we're also going to define the password. Now the password again is going to be getenv, and we're going to say Couchbase RBAC password. We can add a semicolon to that. Now that we've authenticated to our cluster, hopefully we can say cluster, and we can say, well, actually we haven't authenticated yet. We have to use this authenticator. So we want to say authenticate. We're going to pass in authenticator. That doesn't seem right as far as a term. All right, so I do a lot of typos. That's all right. We'll figure them out at some point or another. But we're going to say cluster authenticate, and we're going to use that authenticator. Now what we can do is we can say bucket equals cluster open bucket, and we can say getenv Couchbase bucket name. All right, so at this point we should be connected to our cluster, and we should have opened up a bucket. It should be ready for use. We should be able to start coding. So we're going to do some very, very simple code here. What we're going to do first is we're going to create a try-catch block. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to first try to read a document based on its ID. If it throws an exception, it's probably because that ID doesn't exist in the database. So in that case, we want to catch it, we want to create the document, and then we want to read it. So first of all, before we start getting into our catch block, well, actually I can finish it off. What we're going to say is Couchbase exception, and we'll just add some brackets there. All right. So for our try, what we can do is we can say result equals bucket get enraboy. So the key in this case, the document key or the document ID is enraboy. And we're going to get it, and we're going to store the result in this result variable. If the exception is thrown, remember, we're going to say bucket. We're going to say insert. We're going to say enraboy, and we're going to provide it some data. So we're going to provide an array here, and we're going to provide somewhat complex data. It's definitely not as complex as it could be, but definitely not flat either. So what we're going to say is we're going to say name, and we're going to say Nick Raboy. We're going to say social media, and this is going to be another array. So we're creating an object here to store in the database. But this is an array, and we're going to say, let's say Twitter, HTTPS, twitter.com/nraboy. And then we're going to say website, and this is going to be the polyglot developer.com, and this is probably enough for now. So we have a nested object here inside of our document, which is all right. It's definitely not the point of this tutorial. The tutorial here is actually deploying this and making sure that it works with Couchbase Server in the end. But at least we have something a little more complex. After we catch it, we can do result equals bucket get enraboy. So this is within the catch still. So we've inserted it. After it inserts, we can do a get to get that information and make sure everything's all good. Now finally, what we can do, and we can actually do it outside of this catch, is we want to echo our result. So we want to display the JSON data that was retrieved from the database, so that way the client or the script or whatever's running it can have access to that data. And we can do that by simply saying echo JSON encode result value. And there's a whole lot that you can do in Couchbase beyond just this key value stuff. Definitely you can do nickel and SQLite queries and things like that. Again, very basic example, just to get deployment out of the way. So we do have our application. So the next step here is we want to kind of deploy this application as a container. So we need to create an image. And to create an image, we have to understand the requirements of the Couchbase SDK for PHP. And we can do that by going into our web browser. And what you can do is you can actually go to the PHP documentation for Couchbase. And we're actually just going to copy and paste a lot of this. And this is going to be part of our Docker blueprint, so our Docker file. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back into my editor. And I'm going to go into my Docker file. And I'm going to paste this in. And this is only a part of what we need, but it's a start. So before that, we kind of need to define, well, what version of PHP are we going to be using? So we're going to be using the PHP image, and we're going to be using version 5.6.30, and there could be newer versions, there could be older versions. Just pick whatever one makes more sense to you. But we're going to be using the Apache version, not the Nginx or similar. So we do have the Apache image. Before we can actually start doing all of these wget commands, you probably should note that Docker probably doesn't have the wget command, and for sure we're not going to be using sudo. So we do have to change things up a bit. But for the most part, it holds true to what the documentation told us. So after we define our image, we're going to say run apt-get update. So we're going to update our package list. We're going to say run apt-get install. And we're going to say yes to everything. We're going to install wget, and we're going to install lsb release. And this will give us what we need to do the next step. So the next step would be to download this latest version of the PHP SDK. What we're going to do is we're going to say run in front of the wget. For Docker, doing run means that it's going to run these at image build time, not image deployment time. We're going to remove the sudo because we're already in privileged user mode for Docker. We're going to say run. We're going to say run again. Let's just replace all these with runs. Perfect. So we have the essentials here. So we have what we need when it comes to deploying, well, not necessarily deploying, but getting PHP ready to go with the Couchbase SDK. But we're not done yet because we have to define, well, where are we going to put this index.php file? What are we going to do about any kind of PHP configuration? So this is stuff that we have to take into consideration. So first of all, we want to be able to run this from a web browser. So we need to change the working directory. We're going to change the working directory to var www/html. So what we want to do is we want to deploy our PHP file to this directory, which is already configured by Apache to serve it. The next step is we want to copy over our application. So we want to copy from the host machine to the container image. So we're going to say copy. We're going to copy over from the application directory, and we're going to copy over to var www.html, and then right in there. So what we're saying was copy everything from the application directory and copy it into this HTML directory. The next step is, well, we have the PHP file. We need to have the configuration file because we don't have a configuration yet. There's no definition of our Couchbase extension. Because if we look at the official documentation here, we need to edit the file wherever it is in here. It's somewhere in here. It's saying that for Mac and Linux, so we're on Linux, we need to add this extension. So the easiest way to do this for Docker is to go to GitHub and get the latest version of this PHP ini file from the PHP project. So what we can do is we can download it. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. I'm going to go back into my terminal here, and I'm going to copy it, PHP, and I'm going to copy it over to, let's see where we are. So configuration. And this is actually going to be php.ini without the txt extension. So I copied it over. I can validate this. It has the PHP ini file. We need to add that line to it, the extension line. So let's just go ahead and copy that. We're going to find where the other extensions are. So we have, I'm just going to drop it in here with the other list without the semicolon, which is a comment. So I'm going to save it. It's saved. It's ready to go. We need to copy that over. So what we can do is we can say copy. and we can say configuration php.ini. We're going to copy it to user local etc PHP. So this is where you would typically find the php.ini file, and what we're doing is we're just replacing it so that way it's ready to go with our custom configuration. And there's other ways to do this. You can map the volumes from the host, etc. But for this example, this makes the most sense. So we have our custom php.ini file. All right, finally, what we want to do is we want to change the permissions just in case they got messed up along the way. We're going to say change ownership. We're going to change it to www.data for the group as well as the user. And we're going to do this recursively to the working directory, which is this var www HTML file, or directory. So anything that we've copied over essentially. And we're going to save it. So at this point in time, we should be able to build an image and hopefully it works out fine. So I'll go back into my terminal now. I'll move this over just in case you want to see everything. And we're going to say a few things here. So first of all, let's figure out where we are as far as a path. We're at the root here. We're going to say docker build. We're going to give it a tag name, so we're going to name it. I'm going to call it custom PHP. And the current path contains the Docker file, so I'm going to use the current path. And it should take, depending on if you have all the necessities, it might take a few minutes. So we're just going to let it go and do its thing. All right, so it did error out, in case you didn't catch it. So it errored out, not able to locate the particular package PHP dev. If that happens, let's change it to a PHP 5 dev, because that should work. And the great thing is if we rerun this command, it's only going to take a fraction of the time because everything got cached. So we'll run it again. What we also want to do, because it did fail again, and I should have caught this, but for this run command on line 11, we're just saying run, and it doesn't know what to do if it comes across a yes or a no scenario. So we want to add the -y that we added above. So I'm going to say -y. So it's now just going to say yes to everything. And it looks like I think we should be good now as far as it succeeding. So let's try it one more time. All right, so it looked like it succeeded this time. So we should have an image if we say Docker images. We have custom PHP, so it's there, it's ready to go. We also have Couchbase Server, which I already do have running. So now we can worry about actually deploying it. So I cleared my terminal. What I want to do is I want to start deploying this application so that way we can try it out. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. So we're going to say docker run. What we can do is we can say, we're not going to run it in detached mode. You know what, we can. Let's go ahead and run it in detached mode. No, you know what? Let's run it as interactive terminal mode. So it won't be detached, it'll be interactive terminal. We can actually log into the application. So we're going to say docker run. We're going to provide it a port that we can access it on. So 8080 from the host, 80 from the container. We're going to pass in some environment variables because remember, if we go to index.php, we have environment variables that we need to pass in when we deploy this container because it's not part of our image, the actual value of these variables. So we can say -e. We can say Couchbase host. In this case, my host is Couchbase, and we can say -e, and we're going to say Couchbase RBAC username, and it doesn't really matter the order. This is going to be example. Couchbase RBAC password. It's going to be very strong 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then -e, and that's going to be Couchbase, if I can spell, Couchbase bucket name equals example. And it doesn't matter if the username matches the bucket name. It's just what I've conveniently named them both as. So we have the environment variables, we have the port. Let's go ahead and give our container a name. We'll call it PHP example. What we can also do is we can say we're going to provide it the image. So custom PHP is what I believe I called it. And then finally, because we're doing interactive terminal, and I'm not sure if the order actually matters, so I'm just going to put the interactive terminal over here, IT. But what we're going to do, because we're doing interactive terminal, let's provide it the shell that we want to use. So we're going to say bin/sh and hit enter. So it did log us in. I'm inside of the application. What we can do now is hopefully, if everything works out well, what I can do is I can say php index.php. So it errored. So let's figure out what happened here. So if I had to guess, if I had to take a wild guess based on this very messy situation here, the connection failed. So I think our two containers are not on the same network. So this can be corrected. So what we can do is I'm going to say docker network create. I'm going to call it nraboy. So I've created a network. What I want to do is I'm going to destroy all of my containers. So I'm going to say docker rm force docker psaq. It's going to remove all of them. That means that I also have to redeploy Couchbase Server. Let's see if it's still in my history here. Yeah, it is. So I'm going to run it again. I'm going to go through the setup real quick, so that way, and actually I messed up again. So let's go ahead and bring it down. When we run it, I have to define the network now. So we're naming it Couchbase. The network is going to be nraboy. All right, now let's give it a shot. Go back to localhost. It's gonna make me create it again. We'll just do it real quick. I'm not gonna talk through it. So I have it created. I'm gonna create a new bucket. I'm gonna call this example. Create some new security roles. Example. And this will have read and write. Again, the focus here is not deploying Couchbase, it's deploying PHP that works with Couchbase. So we should be good on that aspect. Let's go ahead and run the other command again, but this time we're going to define the network. Let's go ahead and say network nraboy, deploy it. Hopefully this works. We're going to say php index.php, and it did not work again. All right, so I think it failed because I used a plus symbol. So let's go ahead and change that to a dot. I'm going to save it. I do a lot of different languages, so the pluses and the dots, they throw me off every once in a while. So what I need to do, I don't need to destroy Couchbase, but what I need to do is I need to rebuild my image. So I'm going to say docker build. I'm going to give it a tag. I'm going to say custom PHP again. I'm in the current working directory. Should be very fast. It's done. So what I can do is I can redeploy it. I need to give it a different name for a container. I'm going to call it PHP example 1. I'm going to deploy it. Let's go ahead and try this again. Looks like we're doing a little bit better. May have provided invalid username and password. That's interesting. Maybe I mistyped it when I was typing it in. All right, so it looks like I made another typo. Again, if you've been following my videos, you know I'm riddled with typos. So I misspelled Couchbase up here. So let's go ahead and try this again. I'll stop it. We'll get there eventually. So we'll go ahead and fix this typo. And I'm sure you probably saw this when I was typing it in. That's all right. We'll start this again. Probably going to tell me, yeah, I already have it started. So we'll just change it to 2. We'll say php index.php. And it looks like it worked this time. So it printed out a result. And if I wanted to, I go to my web browser here. We'll go ahead and go here. We'll say localhost 8080. Page isn't working. That figures, right? Let's see if, oh, you know what? I don't think it started correctly because I went into interactive terminal mode. So I'll exit interactive terminal mode. I'll just remove the IT here. A lot of trial and error here when it comes to a lot of typing mistakes and configuration problems, but overall it's actually not a complicated process. So I'm running it. It should be working. Yeah, it works this time. So the reason why it didn't work is because when I ran it in interactive terminal mode, it overwrote the command that says, you know what, run PHP, run the Apache web server. So I didn't do interactive terminal and it worked out fine. So we'll just do a recap here because I did some mistakes and I want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. First of all, what we did is we created our PHP application. Standard PHP application, very simple. What we did, it returns JSON, but what we did is we connected to Couchbase, so the cluster, just one node in my single node instance, and we set up an authenticator, and we decided to open up a bucket, all of which was passed in as an environment variable to Docker. And you could be using a Docker compose file to do this as well. We did not. After we connected, we did a simple try catch. We tried to get a document based on an ID called nraboy. Didn't exist, so we created it, and then we tried to get it again, at which point we saved it. And we can validate that it actually saved by going to our database here, go to Documents, I click on the document. This is the key, nraboy, this is the data, so exactly what it should be. Now going back into the application here, we created a Docker file. A lot of this was copied from the PHP documentation. We made a few changes. Instead of sudo, we used run. We also added that -y in there, so that way it doesn't error when it asks us a question. And we changed the working directory to what Apache is looking for. We copied our files over, and that includes the custom configuration file we made, and then we changed the permissions. So when we deployed it, first of all, we made sure that they were both on the same network. We opened up the various ports that we needed, and we passed in the environment variables that led us to success. So a lot of it was mostly preparation and fixing my typos, but we got through it. It worked out great, and it's definitely a convenient way to deploy your PHP with Couchbase applications.